Hello, doctors. I'm Dr. Fritz Rapoff of QME Continuing Education, and welcome to this week's presentation. So, have you ever wondered if there was a distinct pattern at all between the length of time a worker is with their employer and the number of claims that they have filed? What about the industry sector and the number of claims that are filed for work comp? Well, the Workers' Compensation Industrial Relations Board just released a study that they conducted focusing on just those questions. And today we'll discuss their findings to see if those claims filing patterns actually do exist. Let's take a look at the extensive study. But first, these are the sources that I wanted to share with you as I referenced when I produced this presentation. Feel free to copy and paste these links into your browser if you'd like to read more about the WCIRB and particularly the subject of today's discussion. So by way of introduction, just wanted to mention that the research shows that employees with a shorter tenure are more likely to become involved in work-related injuries, potentially maybe due to the newer employees being less skilled and less aware of the safety procedures than more experienced employees. The 2016 study also highlighted a decline in the average tenure for the injured workers during a period of increased claim frequency. Now, more recently, the COVID-19 pandemic further affected the employment dynamics with significant shifts observed between 2020 and 2022. Many shorter tenured employees lost jobs in 2020, and subsequently some gained jobs in the same industry while others entered new industries. The recent changes in the labor market and the employee tenure may have long-term impacts on work-related injuries, and we'll see. Now, the WCIRB has conducted a study of employee tenure that focuses on several key areas, including a comparison shifts in employee tenure among injured workers and for those among California workers and relative claim frequency and claim characteristics by tenure. For the purpose of this study, the employee tenure is defined as the length of time that an employee has been employed by their current employer. Getting into the study, we'll first discuss that there is a higher share of claims that comes from shorter tenured workers. Approximately 40% of the claims are from those having less than 1 year of service, and those with 1 to 4 years of tenure account for about a third of the claims. Now, from 2018 to 2020, the share of the claims coming from workers with less than a year tenure decreased, while that those from 1 to 4 years of tenure increased. However, the shift occurred in the tenure distribution since 2020, with an increase in the share of workers with less than 1 year of tenure and a decline in the share of workers from 1 to 4 years of tenure. Now, the share of claims from workers with 10 plus years of tenure declined between 2018 and 2022, whereas the claim share for those with 5 to 9 years of tenure experienced a slight increase. Now, here we have the distribution of tenure within each industry group, and it mirrors the overall tenure distribution, with a significant share of the claims from workers with less than 1 year and 1 to 4 years of tenure. However, variations exist within the same tenure groups across the different industry groups. Now, claims from workers with less than 1 year of tenure are more likely to be in service-provided industries, suggested an elevated risk of injuries among those less experienced service workers as compared to workers of similar tenure in other industries. The difference in the injury risks for workers in this tenure group could be related to possibly generally a higher turnover in the service industries, especially since 2020 and the epidemic, and shown in 2022, the Bureau of Labor Statistics. Now, as suggested by published research, changing jobs often requires workers to go through periods of training to learn their new skills, during which the workers may be more susceptible to accidents. Now, claims from workers between 1 and 4 years of tenure are more likely to be in the healthcare and education industries as well. Between 2018 and 2020, all industry groups experienced a decrease in the share of claims from workers with less than 1 year of tenure. However, since 2020, there's been an upward trend of this tenure group. Meanwhile, the shares of claims from workers of other tenure groups has either decreased or remained stable across all of the industry groups. Now, the shift in the share of injured workers with less than 1 year of tenure across all industry groups since 2020 in part reflects the economic impacts of the pandemic. In almost all industries, workers had more opportunities to change jobs or enter new employment, driven by a strong labor market where the job openings outpaced hiring in California through 2022. Now we're going to discuss the relative claim frequency by tenure groups. Now, workers with less than 1 year of tenure have more than twice the likely to have a claim relative to the statewide average, while workers in the other tenure groups have a lower than average likelihood of having a claim. In particular, workers with 5 years to 9 years and 10 plus years of tenure have an approximately 40% lower likelihood of having a claim than the statewide average. The difference in relative claim frequency by tenure group reflects a higher risk of work-related injuries among those with the shortest tenure. Conversely, however, those with tenure of 5 years or more had a significantly lower injury risk, potentially driven by more on-the-job experience and safety training. Now, this pattern is consistent with the published research. Now, the higher likelihood of having a claim among workers with less than 1 year of tenure is largely driven by those in physical labor and service providing industries, mostly related to the hazardness of these industries as shown by the industry average frequency relative to the statewide. Those in physical labor industries are more than 3 times as likely to have a claim, the highest across all of the industries, while workers in the service-provided industries are about twice as likely to have a claim. Now, within physical labor industries, workers with 1 to 4 years of tenure also have a higher than average likelihood of injuries as compared to workers in the same tenure group in other industries. And finally, workers in the healthcare and education and office-based industries generally have a much lower risk of injuries, both overall and across all tenure groups, than those of physical labor and the service-providing industries. Shouldn't be a surprise to us. However, there does remain a notable difference in the risk of injuries between workers with less than 1 year of tenure and those with longer tenure, even in these lower risk industries. Now, among the injured workers aged 16 to 34, those with less than 1 year of tenure are more likely to have a fall or struck or a cut injury. The injury patterns may be attributed in part to less training, experience, and familiarity with the hazards and risks associated with their new jobs. Now, in the same age group of 16 to 34, those with longer tenure are more likely to have strain injuries versus the cut, and potentially because certain strain injuries, such as those that are caused by repetitive motion, take time to occur. Among injured workers with 5 plus years of tenure, strain injuries occur more than 40% of all of the claims. Now, similarly, injury patterns are observed among workers aged 35 to 54 and those of 55 plus, except for a lower share of cut injuries and a higher share of fall injuries in the tenure groups. The difference may be reflected by the impact of age and potential comorbidities. But the leading causes of injury for workers of different tenure are still consistent with the published research. Now, the share of CT claims increases for workers with longer tenure, obviously, mostly because it takes time for a CT injury to occur. The correlation between longer tenure and higher share of CT claims remains consistent within each age group. Now, injured workers aged 35 to 54 had the highest share of CT claims in all the tenure groups. In the age group, the share of CT claims increased 6% for those with less than 1 year of tenure to over 12% for those with tenure longer than 1 year, which is a twofold increase. Additionally, injured workers aged 55 plus had a comparable share of CT claims to those of 35 to 54, both overall and within the tenure group of 10 plus years. Now, among workers aged 35 to 54, healthcare and education and office-based workers generally have a higher share of CT claims than other industry groups. For workers in office-based industries, in particular, the share of CT claims increases from 8% for those with less than a year of tenure to about 15% for workers with more than 1 year of tenure. Now, this significant increase in the share of CT claims among the office workers with longer tenures probably related to the nature of desk jobs and extended periods of computer use. Now, the significantly elevated risk of CT injuries for workers with 10 plus years of tenure in healthcare and education and physical labor industries likely reflects the continual and the cumulative exposure to the physical demands of the jobs within these industries. Now, the share of claims involving temporary disability, or TD, only is similar across the tenure groups within the same age group, except for the workers aged 16 to 34, where the share of claims involving TD only decreases for longer tenured workers, obviously. Now, the relationship between TD and tenure for workers aged 16 to 34 suggests that longer tenure is associated with fewer minor injuries, which could be potentially mitigated with increased work experience and safety training. Now, it's not surprising, as younger workers might benefit more from experience and training to avoid more preventative injuries. However, the workers aged 35 to 54 and 55 plus, the tenure-related impacts on TD appear to be limited after adjusting for age. Also, the share of claims involving permanent disability, PD, is higher for workers in 35 to 54 and 55 plus age groups. This may not be surprising, though, as older age can exacerbate some of the impact of injury on permanent disability. Now, for injured workers within these age groups, the share of PD claims varies little by tenure, suggested limiting tenure-related impacts on permanent disability after adjusting for age. Now, the correlation between the tenure and permanent disability is more pronounced with workers aged 16 to 34, potentially because, unlike the workers of 35 to 54 and 55 plus, the median age of workers in this age group differs slightly by tenure. Another potential factor is a slight difference in the industry mix, as injured workers are longer tenured, are more likely to be in service workers and less likely to be office workers. As claimed from longer tenured service workers are more likely to involve permanent disability, the industry mix could contribute to a higher share of permanent disability claims with increased tenure. And finally, the average incurred losses on indemnity claims valued at approximately 18 months from the policy inception tend to increase with tenure. Now, the correlation largely persists, adjusting for age differentials, as indicated by the pattern within each age group. The pattern is partly driven by permanent disability claims that typically have a higher average incurred losses. Now, the correlation between incurred losses and tenure is the strongest for injured workers between 16 and 34. Of the total incurred losses, medical losses are much higher among those with 10 plus years of tenure, but indemnity losses increase with tenure, potentially driven by benefits of permanent disability and their weekly wages, which largely determine temporary disability benefits. Now, both factors are higher for longer tenured workers in this age group. So, doctors, this extensive study by the Workers' Compensation Industrial Relations Board did uncover some intriguing trends and some that were not so intriguing and pretty well expected as to the relationship between employee tenure and the number and types of workers' compensation claims that were filed in California. Some were surprising, while others were predictable. But these findings were interesting nonetheless. So, doctors, I'm Dr. Chris Rapoff, and I wanted to thank you for taking the time to join me in this presentation. I hope you enjoyed it, and I do look forward to sharing other interesting subjects with you as they relate to topics involving workers' compensation in the state of California. Until next time.